Understand? Does everybody understand how this is going to roll? Okay. First thing you're going to have to write down is obviously give yourself this headline. Lesson 1, water, dissolved particles, and diffusion. So go ahead and give yourself that headline, and then we will chat about this bad boy just a little bit, man. All right. What about this stuff that you see up here? You see that white substance, and think about things that can be dissolved in water. What would y'all take a guess and say that might be up there in white? Yeah, it could be salt. What else could it be? Sugar. All right. Those are all good guesses. Could be powdery substance. Is it cocaine? Most likely not. Right? But most people are probably not going to pour their cocaine in a glass of water. All right, now, anyway, you're just writing a headline here. Here's some vocabulary. You don't have to write any of these, but I want you to think about them. To dissolve something. That's basically meaning things are being broken down. A polar molecule. That means something that has a positive end and a negative end. 2 words today you're probably going to learn for the first time might be hydrogen bond and covalent bond. Diffusion, you'll find out that is the movement of things later. Concentration is not you paying attention. Concentration is actually how strong something is. You can have different strengths of medicine, different concentrations. You can have different concentration of alcohol. You can have different concentration of marijuana. Right? Speaking of cocaine, you can have different concentrations of cocaine. Concentrations come in many, many different shapes and forms. Okay, so that's what this is. Oh, which water would have the highest concentration of salt? Ocean water or river water? So that's how concentration works. Now, you'll eventually run up along a term called equilibrium. What word jumps out at you there? So something's going to be balanced, ain't it? All right. Then you got soluble and insoluble. And both of these you will see on the EOC. So we need to learn what those mean. All right, now, so let's go ahead and go to the first slide. Let's talk about water and its importance, right? So you will write water and its importance, Roman numeral 1. And we'll make some notes underneath that. Why is water even important to begin with, man? Well, that's a good question. It's typically $1 million question. People want to know why we talk about this crap anyway, right? Why are we even talking about water? Well, first off, it makes up 75 to 90% of all organisms. That's a lot. That is a huge amount of your body. That includes you. All organisms, just FYI, that includes you. 75 to 90% of your body is water. That's why we're able to move around like we move, like water, because we're so much made up of water. And your body actually gets rid of water. Do you know how you get rid of water? Just say, I'm going to put this here. What helps you get rid of water? You can sweat. Yep. There's an organ that helps you remove water. Do you know what it is? It's your kidneys, your bladder, your urethra, all those things. Now, look at this woman. What's she doing? They're drinking water. So how do you get water back in your system? You have to drink it, right? Being rained on does not qualify, does it? Can you go stand outside in the rain and get rehydrated? No, it don't work like that. Don't work like that. But now, water is important also because what can it do to things? It can dissolve things. And the fact that it can dissolve things means that things can be transported, right? Things can be transported through living things and anything that is primarily water. And the 2 things that are primarily water, let's see if I can even get this to work. There's my green. The 2 things that are primarily water, one in plants is sap, and the other one is blood in humans. And blood in humans is a major part of our circulatory system. All right, now there's a term you need to learn about, water being a polar molecule. So let's go ahead and jot down this headline, water is a polar molecule, and let me see if I can explain this to you, right? What it means to be a polar molecule is it's kind of like you got a net positive end and then a net negative end. So to be a polar molecule, you will have a net negative side and a net positive side. And the biggest example that you will talk about in here will be water, right? And water being a polar molecule, it gives it the ability to dissolve other molecules, okay? Water being polar gives it the ability to dissolve other polar molecules. If I was to draw water, it would look like this. It would be a 1 oxygen atom, and then I would have 2 hydrogen atoms, right? That's why it's H2O. And it says in this set of notes that typically These hydrogen atoms have a net positive side, and then this oxygen has a negative charge. So the way it works out, the way these things are arranged, see if I can get that to work. Oh, there it is. This will end up having a net negative charge on this side, and this side will have a net positive charge because all the positive charged atoms are arranged that way. And that's what makes this a polar molecule. This right here is actually a molecule of water. Can anybody guess which atom would be red here? Would it be the oxygen or hydrogens? Yes, it's easy. Oxygen. And then the two Mickey Mouse ears are the hydrogen atoms. All right, so there you go. But now, obviously, water molecules, you know, that big glass of water that you see is not just one water molecule. It's thousands of them. So there's another term you'll learn in a little bit too, by the way, which I'll go ahead and teach you now. There is a term called, I'm going to pick me a nice little color. I might use a little bit of light blue here. I feel like Bob Rossing it up today. There is a term called covalent bonds, right? And I want you to know that it is the bonds that are actually holding, it's the bonds that are in a single water molecule. And I'll tell you in a little while what hydrogen bonds are, but covalent bonds are the bonds in a single water molecule, right? Just FYI. You'll learn later that if you've got the bonds in a single water molecule, covalent. Bonds in this water molecule, covalent. But when you have attractions between two different water molecules, those bonds are called hydrogen bonds. And we'll learn that again on a separate slide. Now, one thing I told y'all earlier is water was polar, and that's what allows it to dissolve other things. So I want you to pay attention to this picture I'm about to show you. What you see here in these sodium ions, they're gray. And then these green ions are these chlorine ions. What you're actually looking at is table salt. Table salt's chemical formula is NaCl. These sodium ions have a positive charge and chlorine have a negative charge. This is straight from physical science. Okay? This big molecule here is what you see like a visible grain of salt. Now, remember I told you water molecules, and I'm going to zoom in again really, really close here. Remember I told you water molecules they're polar. The oxygen side is negative, and the hydrogen side, what sides are these charged? They're positive. Y'all remember that? Everybody with me on that, right? So you'll notice this sodium ion that has a positive charge, all of these oxygens, their negative end is turned towards that positive molecule. In magnets, what happens when you take a negative end and you put it to a positive end of another magnet? They stick together, they attract, don't they? Same thing's happening here. Look at all these negative ends. What are these negative ends coming and getting ready to pluck off? They're going to pluck off that ion. They're going to pluck that one off. And they're just going to keep plucking it off piece by piece. And y'all notice over here, this chlorine that's got a negative charge. What color or what end did they turn towards that negative ion? And they just keep plucking pieces off. Do y'all understand? And over time, if you pluck enough pieces off, what are you doing? That's how you dissolve things. Does everybody understand that? Okay, now, two terms. If it does dissolve in water, what will I call it? Soluble. Some things that would be soluble are things like salt, sugar, maybe even what else? Kool-Aid. Everybody loves Kool-Aid. All right. The only thing I like sweet is my Kool-Aid. All right. Now, insoluble. It cannot be dissolved in water. The only thing in this class that we'll talk about that cannot be dissolved in water is oil. And it has a tendency to sort of just sit on top of the other one, don't it? Is everybody cool with that? All right. Write these two words down. This says water is a polar molecule. Don't I already have that headline? Yep. So I told you about the covalent bonds, right? So the next thing I need to tell you is about what type of bonds? Hydrogen bonds, all right? So now just take a look. If I was to look at hydrogen bonds, let's look at this picture so you make sure you understand what you're writing. Now, bonds in the same, let's see, how many water molecules are there in that picture? Can y'all identify them? There's one, right? There is two, and then there's what? Now, what would I call these bonds? Bonds within the same water molecule. They are covalent. There you go. Now, the attractions that are between the hydrogen of one water molecule and the oxygen of another water molecule, those attractions are called what? Hydrogen bonds. Very good. So you do need to know that the bonds between the negative ends of one water molecule and the positive ends of a different water molecule are your hydrogen bonds. And you also need to know that they are very weak. They're very, very weak bonds. All right, go ahead and write that down. Now, temperature resists water change. This is another big one, right? Temperature resists water change. This is huge, man. Go ahead and give yourself this, or not, we'll wait. Let me tell you what this means. I'll give you time to write it. The fact that temperature resists water change is important to us. Why? Because 90% of our body is water, right? That's why it is important to us. Now, I don't know if y'all remember this or not, but our normal internal body temperature, or the temperature of the water in our body, should be at 98.6 degrees. What happens if your body temperature gets way higher than that? You'll end up with a what? A fever, and that could cause you to die. What happens if your body temperature gets real, real low? You'll go into a hypothermic shock and you could die, just like if you were a crab fisherman on that Bering Sea and you fell out into the water. You know, those people can die if they're not warmed up within a few seconds. So it's getting ready to be winter, and it'll be cold. It'll be like 30 outside, 40. If water did not resist temperature change and you went outside, what would happen to your body temperature when you went outside? It dropped, and you would probably die, right? But the fact that water resists temperature change kind of helps us out a little bit, right? That's right. So since water resists temperature change, it resists outside changes, and that helps us maintain what major thing? Homeostasis. So out of all the things that's on here, you probably won't have to write that and that, not necessarily for that, but I do want you to write what you do see underlined. You do need to know that 90% of your body is water. It resists outside temperature changes, and it helps you maintain homeostasis. All right, so go ahead and jot that down. You do need to have this headline, right? So let me tell you what diffusion is, right? I'll tell you what I want you to write from this. Diffusion is the process of the movement of particles that are dissolved. And it was first observed by a scientist. You need to know the scientist's name. What's his name? Robert Brown. He actually initially viewed it by looking at pollen grains that were dissolved in water, and he noticed that they moved in a random nature, right? So I wouldn't say all of that. I would say he probably just initially looked at maybe pollen grains, right? And they moved in a random nature. Now, just like most scientists, he was vain, and he named that initial movement after himself. But now we call that movement of particles diffusion. And this is for Miss Ashmore when she asked me what that word says. It's that word. Everybody got it? All right, go ahead and jot that down. Nice and simple. You're writing diffusion as a headline. You're writing Robert Brown, pollen grains, move in a random nature, and Brownian motion. And if you write those things, you should be covered. All right, nice and easy. All right, now, diffusion. Let me talk to y'all. It's going to be under the same headline here, but let me show you guys what's happening before we write. All right, now, how many of y'all have ever put food coloring in water before? Have y'all seen it before, right? Okay, now everybody's done that for sure. Diffusion occurs when you do that. If you take a little bit of food coloring and you put one drop in that beaker or that glass or whatever, there's going to be an area where all of that food coloring is in high concentration. You see all this area out here where there are no molecules of that food coloring. This will be your area of low concentration. But over time, over a long period of time, if you leave that food coloring in that glass or beaker or whatever, what do all those molecules do? They spread out and they get to be about equal, don't they? Right? And keep that in mind. That was one of those initial little phrases we were getting at, equal. What diffusion is, it is literally defined as the net movement of dissolved particles, and those dissolved particles would be called solutes, and it's all about moving from an area of high to low concentration. And you can actually see it in this picture right here. This is another example of putting that food coloring into some type of water. What concentration would that area be right there? That'd be the high. What about all this area out here? That's the low. So over time, all of these particles begin to move and spread out. They want their own space. And then eventually, what does it look like? Looks equal, don't it? When you've reached this point, this is the point where you are in dynamic equilibrium, right? And I know y'all can't read that, but you can just use your imagination, okay? Now, the one part you do have to write is obviously the definition of which thing? Diffusion. All right, so you can go ahead and jot that down. It is the net movement. Diffusion will always move particles from high to low. And that's another easy way to remember it like that. H point, or H and then an arrow pointing to L. Typically, diffusion is a slow process, but I want to talk to you about this stuff, right? Typically, it is a slow process. If you just put food coloring in water, it takes a while. If you put sugar in water, it takes a while. But there are some things, there are factors that can affect the rate of diffusion. And just FYI, the rate of diffusion is whether or not it occurs fast or it occurs slow. Now, if you increase any of the following, it will speed up diffusion. If you this is on the EOC, unfortunately, I have to go over all of this. If you increase the concentration of the substance being diffused, in other words, if I put 1 drop versus 100 drops, let me ask you, let me scroll back here. If I put 1 drop of food coloring in a beaker, just 1 drop, how long do you think it would take it to get to equal? Just 1 drop. Take a long time, wouldn't it? What if I put 100 drops? Would it happen faster? Would it reach equilibrium faster? So that's why they say if you increase the concentration of the substance being diffused, which would be the food coloring, then it will increase the rate of diffusion. Now, the other easy one to remember is temperature. The way you remember temperature, you think about the solution that the particles are being dissolved in. I want you to think about the water that the sugar is dissolved in sweet tea. Have you ever put sugar in cold water? Does it dissolve and spread quickly? Not in cold water, it doesn't. But what about hot water? Will it dissolve and spread quickly? It sure will. So if you increase the temperature of that solution, then diffusion will occur much quicker. Now, the final one is pressure. All right, and you usually won't see that too much. That's not on the EOC, but you do kind of need to remember it. Pressure you're only going to see when you go deep down in the ocean or high up in the atmosphere. That's the only ways you can increase pressure on an organism. So we won't worry about that one too much. But these two you will definitely see. All right, you can go ahead and jot that down. All right, this is just additional information too, by the way. It should be just right underneath diffusion because it's still the same headline. So we're just adding that it's a slow process. There are factors that affect the rate of diffusion, which is how fast it occurs. And there's an increase in any of the following that will speed up the rate of diffusion. All right, so the results of diffusion, the main point in all of this, guys, what is the main point in all of this, right? Once we get it into our body and once we get these particles dissolved in water, we have to get to some sort of result of diffusion. Now, at the end of the day, what cells want to do is they want to reach balance with their environment. They want to be in homeostasis with their environment. So what they want is for the concentration outside of the cell to be about the same as it is inside the cell, if that kind of makes sense. I just drew a cell, and inside's about the equivalent of outside. When you reach that point, what you see right here, you have reached something called dynamic equilibrium. That means there would be no net change in concentration, and there would be equal concentration inside the cell and outside the cell. And let me show you what this would look like zoomed in. All right, we'll take a look at a diffusion and dynamic equilibrium here. What this is, this dashed line, what that represents, ladies and gentlemen, is the cell membrane. Typically, things go in a cell or out of a cell, so that dashed line represents the cell membrane. What concentration would you have right there, high or low? What concentration would you have right there? So typically, things move from high to low, and then over time, you're going to reach to where they're about balanced, where about the inside will be just about the same as the outside, so the cell will be in equilibrium with its environment. Does that make sense to y'all? Right, that's the main goal. It wants to be in balance with its environment. All right, so you can go ahead and jot that down. I'll give you a second to write that, and then we'll wrap this thing up, man. I think the last thing you'll write is concentration gradient. Just FYI, concentration gradient is just anytime you have an area of high concentration and low concentration. If you are in equilibrium, you do not have a gradient. All right. If you are not in equilibrium, then you do have a gradient. Because things can't be balanced and you have a high and a low concentration at the same time. It just doesn't work like that. I think about the arms of justice, which is like, the arms of justice. It's like a picture in criminal justice or something. If you are in equilibrium, you can't have a high and a low. It doesn't work like that. That doesn't make sense. If you have a high and a low, you have a concentration gradient. Things will move from high to low until you reach equilibrium. So hopefully that helped you a little bit there. It's funny, I'm doing these motions on like the camera on the video part, but the video never records, so I don't even really know why I'm doing this to describe this to people because they're not going to see it anyway. And this is actually how you get the sugar inside your cells. Like after you've eat something or potassium that if you want to get that potassium actually inside your muscle cells, or you want to get glucose inside your body cells so you can make ATP, diffusion is the actual process that makes it happen, right? Diffusion is the real thing. Me personally, I'll be honest with you, I prefer being able to write on these notes because I like being able to have these pictures and explain them more so than I like some of the pictures that I write on the whiteboard. But now that's just me, because some of the pictures on the whiteboard, even as good as I am at art, it does cause difficulties in people figuring out what I've drawn. Do you think so? They probably are. The reason they're a lot shorter is probably because I'm writing them. Now that I don't have to write them, it's like they get a lot longer. But that's good for you. Because I did look at some of y'all's images for your notes that you submitted. I had one person had like 4 lessons on the front of one sheet of paper. I was like, great job there, buddy. Great job summarizing all of that. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, I was like, might need to go back and work on this a little bit harder here. It was a great job, though. I mean, I've never seen so much information just compiled into such a short amount of space. Hey, and then I don't know if this was this person in here. I don't know if it was somebody in here. I think it was. But I saw somebody's abridged notes from a lesson, and all it was the definitions from each section. There's more than definitions from each section that's important. Like this test is not going to be a definition test, so wouldn't hang on to that too much. All right, now I'm going to show you, let's see, this will be the last one for us today. The last slide will actually just be a picture, but let me tell you what this means. Diffusion in living things. All right, diffusion in living things. Whoa, I'm just drawing all over the place there. Let's see if I can undo that. Is there an undo option anywhere? Can I undo that? Where is that at? Oh, no, I want to undo. Can I undo? Yeah, there we go. All right, diffusion in living things, right? Your concentration gradient, you do need to know, concentration gradient will be anytime you have a high area separated from a low area. It tells you that it's the difference in concentration across space. I would just say you have an area of high concentration and low concentration. And if I was to zoom in, you have two examples here of concentration gradients. You've got inside the cell and outside the cell. In A, where would the high concentration be? Would it be inside the cell or outside? All right, so if it's high concentration inside, low outside, what way are these particles going to move? And they'll move out until they eventually reach dynamic equilibrium. Now with B, where's the high concentration? All right, low concentration where? So these particles will move in again until they reach equilibrium, right? So what you have there is two examples of an area where you have concentration gradient. So go ahead and write that concentration gradient and then add that it means there's an area of high concentration and low concentration. And you don't really have to say across space because that's really self-explanatory. Nope, let me scroll it up just a hair. This is just diffusion. What do y'all notice is a concentration outside here, by the way? This is all this picture showing. We're not going to write that. What concentration is this outside? High. What about inside? Low. So over time, things would move from high to low till it got balanced. That would be an equilibrium. And again, guys, that's how we get sugars, potassiums, sodiums, all types of things in and out of our cell. And it is a huge process. Huge process on the EOC. And matter of fact, you know what? Take a look at this real quick before we stop. Let me show y'all one thing. I have seen this picture on the EOC before. Tell me what you think would happen here. If I drew you a beaker, right? Just say a beaker, and it had a little bit of water in it, and it had a cell, and inside the cell was 10% salt, right? 10% salt. And then I told you that outside was a solution that was 40% salt. What way would that salt move? Would salt move into the cell or out of the cell? Well, the high, 40 is high, right? 10 is low. So salt would move from outside to, by the process of, until it about probably got to what? Yeah, what would it be? Maybe about 25. If it could get to 25, that would be pretty level, right? Does that make sense? And then it would be in equilibrium. Does that make sense to y'all? That's all this whole section was about. So hopefully you guys got a grasp on this. You do have